All right, live. Let's see here. Make sure everything is everything, and then we'll go ahead and get the group connected. All right. Hopefully everybody's evening and week have been great. Thanks for pivoting. This is supposed to happen on Tuesday. Life happens, so on and so forth, but we're doing it now. Give a couple of minutes so that way folks can come in. Trying something a little bit differently. Generally, this is more of a monologue style sort of stream. But I'm opening the door for everyone um, to be able to have their 2 cents and ask their questions. All right, fantastic. That's all right. So I have some questions to start off from the that have been submitted prior to all of this. We'll start there, and then basically the way this is going to work is standard AMA style. So as the show goes on, um, will the chat will be open. So if you are unfamiliar with ask me anythings, they are an open format, and for those of you that don't otherwise know, you're not gonna really catch me with any kind of really off the wall questions. The door is open. Now you could, ask ridiculous questions or something like that that make no sense, but as far as like deep or, you know, very very real questions, I encourage any and all to come through. And so if you have it, if you're willing to share in the comments of wherever it is that you are tuning in from, feel free. So I'm going to give another minute or so to let folks trickle in before we really get underway with our first question. Like I said, we do have some questions that have been submitted previously, that have been submitted prior to going live by folks that heard that we were doing the AMA, and then and submitted some questions. So we'll go ahead and start taking those. Like I said, the comment section is wide open for everyone to be able to engage, and then I mean, regardless of if you have a question, go ahead and chime in and let me know where you are tuning in from. Say what's up, the whole nine yards. But it is open for anybody and everybody. It does not matter which platform you're on or what the content of the question is or anything else of the sort. Generally, we have a pretty good turnout on X when we stream on the Pastor Reacts streams and the evening streams. That just so happens to be the quietest subsection of the viewing audience. So I would just encourage you, now's the time. go ahead and chime in with any questions, be them church related, theology. We've been talking about movies and pop culture and all of that kind of stuff. If it's not serious at all and it goes the pop culture route, go ahead and do that as well. That is all free game. It is all on the table. So, with that, like I said, we do have a couple of questions to get the party started. We'll go ahead and start there and go from there. Real quick before we anything. All right. So that way, folks that are jumping in, you will be able to see what we are doing and all of that. So, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and jump into our first question. And this is one that is a pretty common one whenever I'm taking questions about theology. And this is one that I myself have wrestled with a fair amount. So, our inquisitor asks if God really does have a plan that we're too ignorant to see, doesn't that ultimately justify any and all evil actions that are committed? They go on to say, I'm not sure how many of you believe in the God's plan cliche, but it's popular among a lot of the people that I'm around. So let's pretend it's all true. Let's say God has an ultimate plan for everything to work out at the end of time. In a backhanded way, wouldn't that justify and validate all of the evil in the world as well as justify the good? But here I'm focusing on evil, and they go on to list a whole bunch of evil acts that humans can commit, and all of that. So that's irrelevant. You all get the point. You're all smart people. So, okay. So basically it's this idea of it all happens for a reason, right? God makes it all make sense for a reason. So, I I guess my question then becomes, what are we talking about as far as if God has a plan? Because at the end of the day, humans have the agency to be able to make different decisions, to be able to make different calls, um, and do things that are of their own free will. Now, the question then becomes, at what extent does God know what humans are going to be doing and the sovereignty of it all and all of that kind of stuff? The one thing I want to say before anything else is there is an upper bound limit to what we can actually conceive of. And so, what I'm not going to do is try to solve the ultimate complexity of God's sovereignty, free will, all of those kinds of things in any kind of exact measurement. Um, Namely because, again, there is an upper bound limit to what we have an explanation for. And I do think it's all too common to see humans um trying to over explain or overplay their hand when it comes to some kind of cosmic knowledge about the goings on of the universe and the going in the exact goings on of God and sovereignty and all of those kinds of things. So if I take this at face value and say, okay, our viewer here is asking, is it all cosmically coming out in the wash, right? It's all part of God's predestined plan, and that this is moving the plan over to the realm of predestination. The issue here is, yes, the issue becomes, what does God ordain, and what does God allow to happen, and all of that sort of stuff. The reality is, if every single solitary thing happened for, quote unquote, for a reason, then yes, that would in fact validate or make meaningful evil and suffering, because it had a purpose. Now, the issue here is that that humans, that the grand scheme of the picture of predestination has to be contextualized in a context that doesn't throw out the aspects that are very clearly stated in scripture, because part of the fallacy of free will versus predestination is, whenever the meter goes all the way hard to one side or all the way hard to the other side. Simply put, it's a yes and dynamic. Now, just because God has a preferred will, just because God has a preferred way, a preferred means for people to engage with each other, a preferred means for humans to live their life by, does not mean that he has then also orchestrated the other side of the coin to set everything in balance and to make what he wants done. One of the most aggravating things that I have heard is any kind of God gives the hardest trials to his toughest soldiers, or this idea that, it all happens for a reason, because the reality is even the Bible speaks to the fact that sometimes stuff just happens, and that's a very uncomfortable place for a lot of folks to hang out, because the truth is, it's easier to look to something that is greater than us and pin the blame or pin the cause on something greater than looking at random acts of violence or random acts of tragedy or different things like that. So, and out of that, so this is an aerial view of the entirety of the concept, right? Because you can go 87 different directions as far as this goes. And one of the more popular ones that I'm hearing a lot about is this idea of open theology. This idea that um humans can make God change his mind, essentially. And it's all completely taken out from the Old Testament. Like, it's almost solidly the Old Testament is used as the barometer and justification for this stance. The issue is, we have to then reconcile the fact that the Bible very clearly states that God knows the end from the beginning. And that's where we need to understand that there is a level to the fact that, yes, there is a preferred way of doing things, but God is not a micromanager in the classic sense. God is not sitting there orchestrating every single solitary beat and every single solitary situation, um in an effort to bring about, you know, his will. Now, because if he did, in in that sense of the idea of sovereignty, then yes, there's a lot that God would have to be held accountable for, or held in question over, or things like that. But we have to be willing to allow for shades of gray if we are going to um if we are going to allow, or if we're going to authentically go for the truth, like plumb the depths of these topics in an effort to find what is true to the heart and character of God. So hopefully that helped. That is a small snippet into a huge topic of conversation. So just a reminder for everybody who is jumping in, this is an AMA, or an AMA, and Ask Me Anything. So as you are coming in, navigate your way to the comment section of wherever it is that you are tuning in from. Go ahead and drop your questions below, and then that way we can go ahead and address them along the way. Right now, we're working our way through some of the questions that have been submitted by some of the viewers, some of the audience members. And so we will go ahead and get to yours as you leave them. Right. Next question. That was a good one. So I've tried not to look at the questions that were prepared for this, because I kind of wanted to give an authentic response to them. It's just how I decided to do it. The next question is, how do you engage with the book of Revelation? Next. No, I'm just kidding. So how do you engage with the book of Revelation? The person says, it's a weird book and it doesn't seem to have a set theme. It reads more like the Old Testament than New Testament, and there's a lot of imagery that I honestly don't know what to do with, which is understandable. For a very, very long time, I absolutely refused. There was actually, for those that don't know, I have a podcast. One of the flagships of the ministry that I have here across streaming and content creation and things like that is a show called Buddy Walk with Jesus. Buddy Walk, one word, with Jesus. And right now we're in a similar model to this, where we're addressing different questions, different big themes, different things like that. And we originally, it was like a talk show format. It was myself and another dude named Edgar. The idea being, we have raw conversation, authentic conversation about big matters of the Christian faith. And he had to drag me kicking and screaming to talk about Revelation. And even still today, I don't necessarily, like, it's not my most comfortable wheelhouse to talk about Revelation, because it's a book of the Bible that is so highly contested and so highly interpreted. And I mean highly interpreted to say that there is a wide variety of different interpretations to be found about this book of the Bible. There are countless interpretations of ways that people choose to read this or interpret this book, ranging from helicopters to end times to tribulation to the Antichrist is here and now to it's all already happened, and we're living in a post revelation world. So and I'm only literally scratching the surface on the countless amount of interpretations that there are for Revelation, which tells me something, and I'm going somewhere with all of this. To anyone who struggles with the book of Revelation and trying to make heads or tails of what's actually happening in this book, understand that you are in good company. Understand that in order to address it, in order to really sink into it, you have to sit in the midst of a world that has multiple interpretations. It's kind of like, for those of you that follow along with Kingdom on the Road, with me and Ant and Andrew and everything that we do, walking through the Old Testament on Friday mornings, we when we hit Genesis, right? When we hit those first couple of chapters in Genesis, and really through the first 11 chapters of Genesis, what we deemed as the mythos of man, um we had said that we have to get comfortable in the fact that, however, we choose to interpret those chapters, sits within a buffet of options and other takes about the book. Right, wrong, or indifferent. Doesn't mean that you're going to believe all of them. It doesn't mean that you're going to agree with all of them. It doesn't mean that I agree with all of them, because I certainly do not. But that is just a tension that we have to sit in. Now, to get into how to wrap your mind around and how to approach and engage with the book of Revelation. See, first and foremost, it is a singular revelation. Can I please, between you, me, and the wall, right? Just between us. I just a small pet peeve. It is revelation, singular, one single revelation. It is not revelations. There is no s. And that may seem pedantic. That may seem like I am splitting hairs. But the problem is if you approach it from a standpoint where you actually think that it is a plural set of revelations, that is where you are going to get yourself turned this way and that way and sideways and into a friggin' pretzel when it comes to end time stuff. Because next thing you know, you're gonna be looking for Jesus in the clouds, y'all, and you're gonna be so wrapped up in fear and anxiety that is largely based off of a particular theological slant and biblical interpretation that was then picked up by one of the single most damaging fantasy novel series of literally all time. And like that's part of what gets me so fired up about this topic is it is literally fiction. It is literally a fantasy series, but this thing is read like it is ripped straight out of the gospel. Like these two we're trying to this is a family friendly show and I'm trying to keep it on the rails. This is kind of Pastor Reacts After Dark a little bit, but we gotta still keep it colored within the lines here. I just don't have a lot of good things to say about the authors of those books because the way that they presented it's not fully in the hands of people who did not have the skill set to be able to distinguish fact from fiction. And that's really the key when you talk about the Left Behind series is how strong is your skill set to be able to discern fact from fiction? Because if you read that and you don't know what direction is what's left or right, what's true or false, then the last thing that I'm going to tell you to do is read those books because it reads compelling. It reads like a harrowing adventure and taps into the instinct of the hero's story and to say that we as Christians are on the right side of everything and we're going to make it out the other side and all of this sort of stuff, or we're going to be martyrs for the faith, or we're not going to have to go through any of this and the world's going to go to hell in a handbasket. It all tickles the human instinct. It's the problem with it. It plays on human nature to want to think more highly of ourselves, and that's really that entire interpretive plan. And I don't like to do that. I don't like to um, come out swinging against an interpretive pattern, but the first things first is that it is a revelation of Jesus. He is the main goal of the book. It is not supposed to be a play by play foretelling of every single thing that's going to happen at the end of the world. So ask yourself this question as you engage with the book of Revelation. Ask yourself how the glory of Jesus is revealed throughout the book. That is by far the most important thing to keep in mind. Now, second, it is a revelation. It ties back to other apocalyptic literature in the Old Testament. So, part of understanding how Revelation works is to understand how its literary structure works. Almost everything is symbolic or hyperbole. And the last thing that you should be doing is trying to approach it from a standpoint that says, the Bible just says what it says. I'm just going to take it at face value. That was never the intention of the book. Like that's part of the problem is the intent of the author matters. The literary structure that was given matters. All of that matters when trying to interpret scripture. All of that matters when properly executing on the text. And so when we approach this section of scripture, we cannot do such a disservice to the text as to just take it at face value and read Revelation literally. Now, deeper into the issues of how to interpret Revelation is making sense of the pre and post and mid of it all, the Antichrist of it all, and that's where that's where like time and subtle nuance is needed to really flush it out. But when we look at the way that Revelation plays out, we need to look at, okay, so what is the intent of the text? Well, it is the full revelation of Jesus Christ. And so then take that into the letters to the churches, and then take that into the linguistic structure of the book. And every single time that you hit one of these questions, like the idea of how does that literary structure work? Well, look it up. Look up what a look up what that style of why am I still live? Yeah, okay. That was weird. Okay. So look up the literary style. Look up the places that are being that these churches, the letter to these churches, where they're at, and kind of the backstory of those churches, and try to cement yourself within the context that's being displayed, and understand that when you look at the entirety of the text, when you look at the entirety of Revelation, that when you see that there are letters to the churches that then are also chock full of symbolism, it is a book that takes time and intention to slowly and methodically work your way through. Literary wise, the book of Revelation is unique, and it has parallels to Genesis, both in structure and in content. The idea of I'm trying to be good, because I'm the idea of a full on tribulation and a full on rapture is not something that I believe in. I don't believe that is accurate, and I don't believe that is what the scriptures are alluding to. As a matter of fact, the system of an antichrist, the system of a new world order, and the end of days, and the 7-year tribulation, and all of that kind of stuff is like something like 200 years old. It's not very old in the grand scheme of things. And so I guess the best thing that I can say is, don't come in preloaded with expectations or trying to get the Bible to say something that it's not authentically and inherently saying. Allow the Bible to develop what's actually happening. And there are some really good commentaries that exist out there that help to be able to bridge references between the Old Testament and the New Testament. One of the ones that was a go-to for me as I was walking my way through the book of Matthew is the use of the Old Testament, the New Testament use of the Old Testament. It was basically like, this is, it kind of broke it up like line by line. This is an allusion to this. This could be an allusion to that. And but it clearly defines what is absolutely a quote or a reference, and then says, hey, this is potentially or possibly also a reference or something along those lines, or a theme or something along those lines. There's also a pretty good book out there by author Scott McKnight, called Revelation for the Rest of Us, that really takes away this idea of, we are all just waiting on bated breath, that for the tribulation and the rapture and all of those kinds of things. One thing I can say with complete and total confidence, y'all, is simply put, yes, there is a second coming. Jesus spoke to it. Jesus spoke to a second coming. But there is there we have to make sure that we are not reading it waiting for the Antichrist to show up, because that is a good way to try, um it's a good way to start to villainize people, because so many countless people are so many countless people have tried to state that they know who the Antichrist is and all of that. And actually, now is the point where we have to, give our PSA about the fact that, if anybody comes to you and says, I know when the end of the world is, I have information on the end of the world, run in the other direction, stop listening. That's I say that tongue in cheek, but not really, because that's literally impossible. It says so in the scriptures. So, again, big topics, but hopefully that helped with trying to engage, because that is, um there's a lot of people spend a lot of years, unpacking those books. It's funny, my two of the members of the KFM family have, each independently started studies of Revelation, and neither one actually finished it, because it's huge. It's a mountain. It's Mount Everest. It's the reason why I have put out on polls that I have put out about Buddy Walk with Jesus, and the idea of, what books do you want to hear me cover, and all of that sort of stuff. Inevitably, I get somebody, either sarcastically or not, asking me to do Revelation, and I'm never going to say never, because I've learned to never say never, because, saying never is a good way to end up finding yourself in that part of town, and I low key don't really want to be in that part of town. But I don't want to, because I don't know, like, there's a lot of the end time stuff. There's a lot of the eschatology stuff that, for me, doesn't sit any more intriguing than realizing the revelation of Jesus in totality. And then from that point saying, well, yeah, there's a second coming. It's going to happen. We know that's going to happen. How's it going to happen? I don't know. Is it going to happen in, with a trumpet and a rapture and all this kind of stuff? Skeptical. Namely because, again, that word rapture is taken from a Latin word, not from the actual scriptures, not from the actual Bible. There is a lot of squint and cock your headness about it, and there are plenty of people that will, um, do some linguistic gymnastics to try and say that this is a thing. But again, I personally think that the book of Revelation is more impactful if we stop and understand that um, it is not about doomsday, that it is about the full and complete picture of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. I think that's where the power comes. So, before I move into question 3, again, go ahead and let me know what questions that you have, what you want to hear me respond to, and all of that, and I will answer them. This is an AMA, which means the dance floor is wide open, and I am taking requests. So, with that, we move on to our next question. Let's see here. Okay. Um, what is in my headphone? What is this saying? What am I? Okay, so basically, this is asking what am I listening to when I am doing when I am doing these these live streams, because I've got headphones in. So am I listening to feedback or am I listening to music? Um, Generally, I'm listening to music. Right now, I am listening to a collaboration between Caleb Hiles, which for those of you that don't know is like he's a musician, but he's like a cover musician. He's like a YouTube guy. Puts out a lot of YouTube covers of different songs. Ashes collab between him, Ashes Remain, and Judge and Jury. So fun facts. Here's a story for you all. I my wife and I met Ashes Remain when they were still an indie band coming up in the Baltimore music scene. We had met them at an event that in when we were still in high school. They and I've been following them. I had their EPs and their original CDs before they hit it big with Everything Good. That seemed to be their really big breakout song that got them on the radio and all of that. And really solidly nice group of guys. Just a really solid group of dudes. I would argue that I like their older stuff a little bit better. It's got a little bit more of an edge to it, whereas they cracked the code of the Christian sound and all of that. So there's that. But I can't knock the hustle. They've been at it for a long time, and so and I do have a soft spot for a lot of their music. I think a lot of their music is really solid stuff. But yeah, I've known of Ashes Remain for a very long time, which actually I just turned on their earliest CD that's on CD. I just dated myself. Um and so yeah. So yes, I am listening to music literally all the time because a lot of years in the culinary industry um was really did in my brain as far as multitasking and all of that, which is actually something that is later on in the list, but I'll go ahead and hit it. What do I do outside of content creation? So I'm a pastor, but I am also a business owner, specifically in the world of marketing, and I spent the bulk of my um, professional career was spent in the culinary world. Spent well over a decade in the culinary industry, running restaurants across the country. I spent um, about 10 years, give or take, um, moving around. Kind of, you only own as much as you can fit in your car and still be able to sleep comfortably. And I basically cooked across the country, and that's part of. And I actually think that that's done me a great service in my ministry career, and really just my mindset when cooperating with other Christians and talking about this stuff, is understanding that there are so many different mindsets about literally everything. There are so many different perspectives, and it you can go 5 miles down the road and it's like you're going into an entirely different state. It's like you're going into an entirely different world, because everything operates differently. And you can have one area, one location, and that location could be referenced by differently by all different groups of people. One of my favorite places, like, so if in all of the places that I have lived, all of the places that I have been, the top of the list for me is the Twin Cities, Minnesota. My a big part. I got saved in Minnesota. I got evaluated for a Michelin star in Minnesota. I have a lot of experiences happened. I had one of the coolest cats that you could ever ask for while I was living in Minnesota. His name was Tiger Bob, the Tigre one. He was awesome. My very first cat was an orange cat, and he taught me um he taught me what it means for an animal to love you unconditionally. He was an awesome cat. Um, but yeah, so there's a lot that took place in Minnesota, and um I lived in an area of St. Paul that many would classify as, oh, I don't know, how do I say this, the hood. I lived in the ghetto, and it was a part of town that a lot of people didn't have a lot of nice things to say. Me, that was one of my favorite places to live. It's a place that taught me community. It's a place that taught me, like, what it means to be a part of a community, and what it means to be for a community. And I would argue that now today, now I've I am in an area and lived in an area for, I don't know, a handful of years now, that has really taken my wife and I in. Like, and in turn, I am for this community. I love this community. I love these people, and will do and go out of my way for this community and for these people. I argue that I don't that doesn't happen without me learning from my experiences in Minnesota. And part of that is um part of that is, you know, it's a community. Well, first off, it was a community where somebody that looked like me was not very common. I was, in fact, the one of the only white dudes that lived on the block. And one of the things that they cared a lot about is, are you coming in to stir up trouble, or are you actually going to be about the community? And as I engaged with the people, I wasn't there to like. I was, dude, in the restaurant business. You ain't got time to cause trouble. Like if you're doing it and you're in there, like swimwear, um, you're working too much to be able to really cause a problem and all of that sort of stuff. And so, um, but when I wasn't, I just this is, and mind you, this is well before becoming a Christian, let alone anything having to do with pastor, anything. This is when I was antagonistic to Christianity. So it's not like I had some kind of religious high ground that I was trying to live up to or anything else like that. It's just a matter of this is where I live, and I want where I live to be peaceful. I protect my peace. I have worked very hard in my life to make sure that my corner of the world has the least amount of drama in it as possible. Doesn't always work out that way. Sometimes drama finds you, but that's a horse of a different color. Um, so I wasn't gonna bring chaos. And what I saw around me were just a lot of families that were just trying to do life, that were just trying to be, and all of that. And so it was just a matter of, okay, so how do I give to these people? Because these people took me in. And we're talking about family meal. We're talking about the block parties. We're talking about we closed down the street, and we are, everybody brings something for everybody, and everybody's welcome as long as you're part of the community. As long as you're there and engaging, then yeah, do it. um you know that was what mattered. And um that really illuminated to me what was possible, because where I am originally from, um man, it teaches you how to keep to yourself. It teaches you how to be about your own, and you got to walk around looking like you're just not somebody that need be messed with. And you do that for your own safety. It's the kind of place that you don't stop at some stop signs and all that jazz. And so coming from that, and then coming from the upbringing that I came from, and the dynamics that I left when I went to go travel the country and all of that, and grow as a human being. um it was it was really what taught me a lot about becoming the man that I am today, and having the values that I have today. So that wasn't even on the list, and you all got a freebie story time with the Saints. Man, I'm really getting to love these evening streams with you all, because I feel like I could let my proverbial hair down, even though it's back in a ponytail. And it's not just all one big um, theology lesson or anything, or scripture lesson or anything else like that. All right, let's get back to the questions. So the next question that was submitted: how can you be talking about religious things and have can I do it right? Oh, I got it in one, y'all. I got it in one. Horror movie posters in the background. So we talked a bit about this a couple of streams ago when we were talking about Sinners and we were talking about Star Wars. Last week's stream was even more in depth about a variety of different IPs and different things that we were looking at the philosophy in. Honestly, because I think that horror is a unique genre. It allows you to face your fears through the safety of an avatar. You don't actually have to experience it. You can live vicariously from the safety of your own abode through the lens of the person on the screen. Now, I have an upper bound limit. I don't know as though I've ever actually addressed this when talking about my fandom of horror, or really my fandoms in general. I don't need to be seeing nudity. I'm just not a fan. I just don't I'm not I whatever. Like whatever is whatever to whoever, and I'm not judge, jury, and executioner. I'm not the cosmic scales that need be weighting what everybody and their mother should be looking at. I just what unsettles my spirit, nudity. And what unsettles my spirit, child endangerment. I do not like the storyline. I do not think it's clever storytelling to put a child in danger or to kill off a kid. I just don't think that that is clever storytelling. And then likewise, I don't need carnage candy, y'all. I don't need an overabundance of grotesque violence. There is a phrase that became synonymous with like the early to mid 2000s, basically once basically up into the point where we started getting what the fandom deemed elevated horror, and it was called torture porn. Saw was a huge like driving force in the horror genre for this style of, everything gets ratcheted up, everything gets um turned up to 11, and there's just an overabundance of carnage. Do I need to be seeing that? No. It just but to me, that's not the most intriguing part of horror for me. That's not the most intriguing aspects of the medium. What stories are you telling? What topics are you tackling? What are you engaging with? See, I did a video for one of my channels on the movie Final Destination from 2000, and I'm actually working on another video for the Blair Witch Project, which if you weren't unless you were around and a fan of horror in the late 90s, it is hard to capture and put into words the phenomenon that was the Blair Witch Project. It may seem ludicrous and frankly outside of the realm of rational thought to say in the modern world that that people thought the Blair Witch Project was real. Like to say that in the modern day, it may be hard to wrap your mind around. But you got to remember, we didn't live with the internet in our pockets. We didn't have the endless superhighway of any piece of information that we could possibly want at our fingertips. That wasn't life. And the marketing was done in a way for the Blair Witch Project where it was very clever. It was presented in a way as if all of this happened. And in 99, you couldn't really debunk it as quickly as you could today. And so, yeah, I mean, tall tales and urban legends are a thing for a reason. That being said, I address I have a video about Final Destination, and I'm working on one for Blair Witch, because those are two examples of movies that that touch on deeper themes than just um than just like surface level kills, surface level horror. Final Destination talks about predestination. It talks about postmodern life. It talks about what does it mean to live in a world where there's confirmed cosmic forces and different things like that. What is the nature of a cosmic force if it is predeterministic? Different things like that. It asks a lot of really huge questions, and that's what I think horror does best. That's what I think movies do best. I'm also working on a video for Star Wars. Now, last week we talked at length about how I am a huge sci-fi fan because I think it explores the depths of what humans are willing to confront in the great unknown and all of that sort of stuff. It forces us to look safely through the avatar of somebody else at what is unknown and beyond ourselves. And what I think Star Wars does better than any other IP is forces you to look at a buffet of philosophical concepts. I think I struggle to find an IP that has more pound for pound concepts baked into it and character development baked into it than Star Wars. Um and especially in the prequel trilogy. In the prequel trilogy, it is it culminates in a warning against, if you are not doing the work of the people within the system, then uh somebody will come in, authoritarianism will come in and do it for you. And talk about a world where life is imitating art. That's all I'm saying. Watching episode 3 in theaters recently for the 25th anniversary, 20th anniversary? I don't know. 20th. Was uncomfortable. It hit different. It hit different. I don't know, maybe that'll stir up some more comments and things like that from y'all because that that I don't know who all is watching. I see the comments that come in, and I see the ticker up on the top of my screen. That tells me how many of you all are in the live audience, and I can see how many from each platform. Outside of that, I don't know. I don't know who you are. You get to sit behind the anonymity of whatever device that you are watching from. And so I don't know how many of you are conservative. I don't know how many of you are liberal. I myself, I'll open the door on the conversation and say I am classically liberal. I believe in the liberties of people. I believe in freedom for people. Like there's a lot. It's all very complicated. It's all very shades of gray to talk politics and things like that. But I am certainly anti-authoritarianism. I am certainly anti-ultra conservatism, and I am certainly against anything that cuts access to basic human needs based off of socioeconomic position. That is the path I choose to. I have chosen. That is the stance that I have taken. Where I draw the line in all of that is saying things like Jesus was a socialist. Jesus didn't have a political affiliation. That's just the reality of it. And you could try to backward your way into saying it's a stance in a philosophical position, not a political affiliation. True in some regards, but still inaccurate to say that Jesus held to it. We can look at some of the tenets and say, hey, he acted in a certain kind of way, and a certain kind of way that white evangelicalism wouldn't necessarily be mirroring. But it's so I bring up all of that to say that movies and pop culture gives us a window into processing the world. It gives us a window into processing the life that is around us, and gives us an opportunity to face down big concepts. and an avatar in which to process them through. And for me, and what my soul can handle, that includes a certain level of horror. Now, um, I've made little quips here and there that I started watching horror at too young an age. I sit in a weird spot. Do I think that more Christians need to get kicked out of their safe little hobby holes where they're watching God's Not Dead and Duck Dynasty and listening to pop Christian radio and be exposed to the world? Uh-huh. Namely because most of that stuff sucks. Just said it. And I I would say I'm not taking questions at this time, but I'm literally taking questions at this time. Um, but I I for as much as I sit in that world, I'm like, okay, at what part at what point is some of it doing harm to our souls? At what point are we messing around with things or engaging with things that do that puts us in a bad soul space? And that's a question that is that looks different for everybody. That's a multifaceted question, y'all. That is not a one size fits all sort of thing. Um and that's something that we have to be okay with and stop trying to police other people and stop trying to determine what is and isn't okay for other people to be engaging with. Um it's just that simple. And so I look at horror and I'm like, okay, I saw Nightmare on Elm Street for the first time when I was 5. Um I will be the first one to tell you unequivocally that that was too young. I was too young to be messing with that stuff at that age. Um that being said though, I don't think it's as black and white to say that I you shouldn't be at all. But while I think that there is a world where folks need to be more willing to try and explore and different things like that, I as an adult, if the time came where I would have any more kids, I would have to ask the question of what do I allow my kids to watch and when? How do I engage with pop culture with my kids in a way that keeps their soul safe and keeps their spirit healthy and all of that sort of stuff. um and that's not an easy question to ask or answer. That's not an easy thing to be addressing. um it just isn't. And so yeah, it's a big concept. For anybody who has been offended by my backdrop or not appreciating my backdrop or anything like that, um sorry. The idea is never to offend or anything else like that. But I feel very secure in my faith and still being able to say that I am a fan of horror. I am a fan of a variety of different genres and movies and IPs. So let's see here. Oh, and for anybody who's keeping track of what I am listening to and what's bumping in my ears, we have now switched to the Google Dolls because wild opinion of the evening, I think the Goo Goo Dolls are one of the most underrated bands of the 2000 or of the 90s and 2000s. And no, I'm not just talking about Iris, though I do like that song. I'm just, I think that I think that they are incredibly talented musicians, and a lot of their music is absolutely out of bounds. All right, let's see here. All right, next question. Are all millionaires guilty of the deadly sin of gluttony? Let me look something up real quick before I answer this. I want to be sure that I say something correctly. All right. Cardinal sins. Okay, so it does come from okay, 4th century reference deadly sins, evil thoughts can be categorized into. Okay, I wanted to make sure that that was correct before I stated this, that it does come from that the seven deadly sins come from the Catholic Church. And again, I didn't hit this in between questions, but there are this number fluctuates from question to question in between questions, and so I just want to, for all of you that have been tracking this entire time, if this is getting repetitive, I apologize, but there are new people, and we need to make sure that the new people know that you can chime in from wherever that you are watching. Go ahead, drop a comment, let me know what questions that you have. This is an AMA, as it says, ask me anything. Sound off in the comments. The dance floor is yours. You all are dictating the pace of tonight's festivities. Trying something else, seeing if this is a good fit for the live stream, taking it as it comes, because reality is this live stream. I wrapped up teaching a class, and was looking for something to throw in there, and saw a lot going on about a particular topic of conversation, I don't know, probably about a month ago, and decided to go live, and pastor reacts to something specific, and now we're here all of these weeks later. So we're still learning what all of this looks like. So if you have questions, all of that, then go ahead and drop them below, and we will hit them. So are all millionaires guilty of the deadly sin of gluttony? They're wondering whether or not excessive hoarding of wealth or resources is part of the whole idea of gluttony, and um and if that's, does that mean that rich people are damned and all of this sort of stuff. So first off, we have to address the fact that I'm not going to be hitting this from a standpoint where I would draw the distinctions on the different types of sins that my Catholic brothers and sisters would draw. Now, a couple of things that probably need to be mentioned. There are plenty of people who think that I am Catholic, namely because of how I talk about the supernatural and things like that. That is not true. I do not submit to the papacy. So at the very minimum, I couldn't be Roman Catholic. That being said, I'm not Orthodox either, and I think if more people understood the verbiage of orthodoxy and the Orthodox Church, more people would accuse me of being Orthodox than they would accuse me of being Catholic. But no, I do not add distinctions onto the different types of sin. And so to say a deadly sin is not necessarily a distinction that I would draw. But coming from the perspective and the POV of a somebody who has spent a long time studying the mystics and the mystical tradition, the Desert Fathers, all of that sort of stuff, I will say that I would mention that there has been a lot of discourse, a lot of back and forth about whether or not it is a sin to have a certain amount of resources or money. If this is just being framed in a very particularly Catholic sort of perspective. And I should say, for anybody watching who is Catholic, I have a lot of respect for my Catholic brothers and sisters. I just do. I personally see no biblical backing or precedent for the papacy, for the Pope and submitting to the Pope and all of that sort of stuff. You know, that all of that sort of thing. But I also do not succumb to the raging anti-Catholic sentiment that happens a lot in the West. So that being said, I don't think that there is any backing to state that by default it is any holier to be poor than it is to be rich. Being rich is not a sign of God's favor on your life. It is not a distinction that God is with you. It does not make you God is not waiting to make you healthy, wealthy, all of that sort of stuff. Likewise, there is a deep vein within asceticism that states that there is holy virtue in not having things. And I don't think that that's accurate either. As a matter of fact, I think that's dangerous to go down because it puts criteria on God's it puts criteria on the saving work of the cross. Now, heart matters, intentions matter. Now, I mentioned, for those of you that have been rocking this entire stream, I went into my professional experience, the fact that I am a business owner. There are some folks I don't wear on my sleeve that I am a pastor and a business owner, because many folks get a particular idea in their heads when they start hearing words like entrepreneurialism in connection with the pastorate, because there are many pastors out there that mix those two things together in a really unhealthy way, that start to mix those two worlds in a way that makes it holy to own a business, or makes it holy to be rich, or something along those lines. So if you have resources, what you do with them matters, and your stewardship of them matters, just like anything else. The stewardship over what you have matters. That's not a criteria that you get to pick up and put down. It's not one that has specific parameters or boundaries based off of a certain income bracket or a specific situation or dynamic. It is something that goes deep into the nuts and bolts of the human experience. So if you have a little, you're responsible to steward a little well. If you have a lot, you are responsible to steward a lot well. So having a lot is not in and of itself gluttonous. It is not in and of itself a deadly sin. It is not in and of itself an incorrect thing or a dangerous thing. Now, part of what Jesus was getting at when he spoke about the rich in heaven and all of that is when you have money, when you have resources. Let's take it back to comic books for a second. What is Batman? Show of hands, who knows what Batman's secret superpower is? It's money. It's being filthy, stinking, stupid rich. It is a superhero, or is a superpower. In this country, you get more, you live better if you have more. That's just the reality of the United States. And when you look at the dynamics of the rich, it is very easy to lean on your own understanding and not seek guidance and reliance on something external of yourself and your situation and your circumstances and all of those kinds of things, because it's just the reality of it. Like, that's humans. And so when we look at rich versus poor, it's not a linear, if you have, you're screwed, if you don't have, you're holy, or if you have, that's a sign of God's favor, or whatever the case may be. It is none of those things. It is simply put a a factual statement on how much you have or how much you don't have. And then what you do from there is on you. What you do from there is the choice that you make on stewarding the possessions that you have. And having ambition. I actually just did a writing for a group that I'm a part of this week on ambition, and if ambition is holy or unholy, if it's prideful or not. And motivation matters. What you do with it matters. Is it self-centered, or is it for the sake of others? Because if you have a lot, then you better be doing a lot. You better be doing something with it. You better be caring for people with it, because that's the life that we're called to. That's the posture that we're called to. We're called to love indiscriminately. We're called to love everyone. We are called to value our neighbor. We are called to value other people. Who is your neighbor? Your neighbor, the answer is yes. There's no upper bound limit to who your neighbor is. All right. Let's see if we can get one more. Let me go through this real quick. And get one that we can hit quick before. Okay, this is interesting. All right. So this is a question that that got left on one of our previous streams. Over on Kingdom on the Road last Friday, somebody chimed in and started asking, what if people believe in God but don't believe in Jesus? Are they going to hell? And that kind of that looks at Judaism, that looks at basically the Abrahamic religions generally. When you ask that question, now the person's not hasn't chimed in today, so I don't know exactly what posture that they were asking this from. But generally, when you hear that question, it's in reference to Abrahamic religions that look to God, that look to Yahweh, but do not ascribe divinity in the messianic sense to Jesus. That and the question being, are those people going to hell? Okay, so first statement that needs to be made is the question from my end becomes, what is your directionality in asking a question like this? Is it a fear of hell? Is it what has brought you to the dance of asking this question? 9 times out of 10, when I hear a question like this, there's some root or motivation in fear-based theology, in wanting to know, where Christians draw the line and who Christians deem unworthy, and all of that sort of stuff. That being said, um, I would hit it from a question that, or I would hit it from a direction that reorients the question. Because if you're talking about the gospel, if you're talking about salvation, if you're talking about what does it mean to be saved and what does that look like, I would say you're focusing on the wrong place. Focusing on hell is focusing from the wrong point of view when trying to wrap your mind around the idea of salvation, because the gospel is life with God. The gospel is not just heaven. The gospel is not just death, burial, and resurrection. The gospel is not about who's in and who's out, who's made the list and who hasn't. And so I would not frame it in a position that says this group of people, they're good, they've gotten in, they've believed the right things, they have the right theology, all of that sort of stuff. Now, part of that is because I think salvation is a lot more complicated than we give credit to. And that's before you even get into what do you actually think the hell is and all of that, which I'm not going to touch tonight. I think salvation is something that we need to frame in a way that honors what the scriptures say about it. And what did the scriptures say about it? That it's life with God. That's why there's references to the now and not yet kingdom. That's why there's references to the fact that God is not absent from humanity only to swoop down in the last days, or absent until we die, or any of those kinds of things. That God is active in our lives in the present tense. And when we understand that, now that changes things. That changes things away from fire insurance. What am I going to do to stay out of hell? What am I going to do to make sure that I'm in the right club, that I believe the right things, all of that sort of stuff. Now you couple on to the fact that there are certain theological stances that basically talk about a positive, it's aspects of universalism. It's aspects of a positive association with the idea of Jesus. It's this idea that what if, or what about the groups of people that never once heard Jesus, never once got ministered to, never once stepped foot into a church, never once heard any of this stuff, and they pass. What happens then? Are all of those people screwed? And that's where I say a lot of this gets complicated, because I think our theology needs to leave room for a God who says, "My preferred will is that no man shall perish," not a God that says you need to believe all of the right things. Yes, I fully admit to the fact that the scriptures talk about salvation in terms of believing on the name of Jesus, that understanding Jesus as our Savior, as the Messiah. I fully and completely understand what the Bible says with that. That being said, this is a God who is willing to meet humanity where they are at. That this is not a matter of sitting there with the clipboard like the bouncer at the club, and you in your name on the list, your name on the list, do you fit this criteria, do you, all of that sort of stuff. I think unfortunately all too often that's the posture that we approach God through, is what is the upper bound limit before you say, ah, you're out, you're going to hell. So that would be where I would start, is reframing the context of what salvation looks like and the complexities of salvation and all of those kinds of things, rather than trying to make a list that says, what about this group of people, what about this person, what about this belief system, all of those kinds of things. I just think it's way more 3 and 4 dimensional than that. I am I, in the purest sense, if you look up the definition of a universalist, that says do that I think every single solitary person will make it in heaven. Do I think that's the case? Well, the reality is I simply don't know. And I understand, cop out, you're waiting for a big controversial take or something along the lines from the pastor, but the truth of the matter is, I guess I'm a hopeful. I have a hope that universalism is a thing, because that would be cool if the reality is that heaven is filled with a whole bunch of people who have come to understand who Jesus is. That'd be cool. Do I know that that's going to happen? No, I don't. Um, what I fundamentally believe is, if I think that there are, I think that if there are people that are living in eternal separation from God, it is not out of God's doing. It is because they have chosen that. C.S. Lewis refers to the inhabitants of hell as successful rebels to the end, that the door to hell is locked from the inside. Now, part of the reason why I'm not going to touch on hell and all of that in in full totality is I haven't actually come to a clear consensus. I have not come to an out and out idea of conditional immortality, or the actual idea of eternal torment, or something along those lines. I just don't know. I think that the Bible is absolutely littered with examples of hyperbolic language that would be references to belief structures that the original audience would have known. I think that can be found in so many different places within scripture. And so I cannot sit here and tell you purely, and part of it is, y'all, that I have not taken the time. I have not taken the time to to fully flush out what I believe and why I believe it, as far as all of that goes. Namely because I'm not sure I care. Just to be perfectly honest, I'm not sure it's a big enough um topic, or an important enough topic to my theology, that I need to fully understand that, because I'm more focused on the relationship with God portion of it than what it looks like for those who don't have a relationship with God. partially because I think salvation's above my pay grade. Who isn't saved is above my pay grade. So I can't give you firm ideas, but what I can point to is the good nature and character of God, the faithfulness of God and God's preferred will. That I can point to, and that is what I would point to in a topic like that. But I will leave you all with one final spicy take, because it's fun to stir the pot a little bit. So if you were looking for a controversial question for today's ask me anything, it is on the list and I am going to answer it. Do I believe in a historic Adam and Eve, and how do I parse out Genesis? So one one of the questions that I really I very much thought about trying to answer, that is like the most hot button one, that was asked and that was submitted for the show, um is was affirmation. What do I, what are my thoughts on the LGBTQ plus community? Um, and I don't know, chime in below if you care to hear my stance on that one. But I want to keep it 100. I don't want to. I don't want. I know there's too many. I know there's too many people who care, and that deeply affects. And I'm not sure I'm willing to subject them to any kind of backlash in the comment section. But do I believe in a historic Adam and Eve? Yes, that is the only thing that I take literally out of the creation account. Do I think that they were the first humans? No, I do not. I do not think that it is reasonable to say that Adam and Eve were the only de novo creation, the only created beings. On that were alive at their time. Actually, I think the story of humanity falls apart if they were. Now, I think if we look at what it means for genetic ancestry to be a thing, then a historic Adam and Eve could have lived like 6,000 years ago and be a genetic ancestor to humanity. Doesn't require them to have been the only humans, though. That's the thing. And so I think they were pre-Adamic humans. Now there is a whole school of thought that says that like the giants in the Old Testament in Genesis and all that, that they were the pre-Adamic humans and all of that. Would I go that far? Absolutely not. But I think I do not think I'm not a young Earth creationist. I do not think that the Bible in any way, shape, or form is a science book. I do not think that it is speaking to a literal interpretation of creation events in any way, shape, or form. I think it's unrealistic to look at it's out of bounds to look at an ancient document and expect anything out of it like that. I think that's a post Enlightenment idea that the West has carried forward, because that's the way that we process the world. And so we process all of this in terms of it being a science textbook. And I just don't think that's proper execution of the text. So, the only reason why I believe in a historic Adam and Eve is that they are referenced by both Jesus and Paul. So I think that there is a clear precedent to be able to say that they were a thing. Just whether or not they were the first or whatever, or all mankind came from them, or whatever the case may be. I don't know about all that. That's where and even more. I've come closer to the idea of a worldwide flood with the ark and all of that, but even that, I'm like, does it need to have been the whole world, or is that poetic language? You know what I mean? Does it have to have been the entire world? I don't think so. I wouldn't necessarily say so. Um, you know, but that's me. That's my opinion. And my opinion in a buck 25 will get you a cup of coffee because it is not theology prime. It is not the closed-handed matters of the Christian faith, and we need to be willing to be humble about things that we don't honestly have a full and complete understanding of. And I think that's very important. So, that's it. That's all. That's a wrap. We are calling it there. I know I teased that that next question, but if you want to hear me talk about that, leave a comment below. Go ahead and submit your questions for the next one. I will be paying attention to the playback of this, and any questions that you have even after the fact, I will make sure that they get answered or logged for future ask me anythings. And for anybody that is again keeping track, I have ended the evening on Tom Petty, because Tom Petty is one of the unsung heroes of the 80s and 90s. I think he is an amazing I think he was an amazing musician and songwriter and all of that sort of stuff. Just unfortunately overshadowed by a lot of his contemporaries, but that's another thing. I don't believe that you need to be listening to just Christian music. Honestly, I think a lot of Christian music sucks. I think a lot of it is not good. But again, it is all about what your heart can handle, what your spirit can handle. But until next time, y'all, I appreciate each of you. Hopefully you enjoyed this Ask Me Anything and getting a chance to learn more about me, and all of that. So if you are in need of prayer, you can go to kfmbroadcasting.com/prayer, where you can go ahead and fill out the form. It will go to our team and we will pray for you. Until next time, remember that you are prayed for and you are loved deeply. All right. Catch you next week. Peace.